Cowboy, making your ideas a reality.
Very, very soft English bridles, that type of thing. Many purse makers, many soft leather good makers have struggles with bending the leathers or getting a nice tight seam. Especially if you're doing pockets or you're doing zippers, you need to be able to fold that edge over so you get a nice clean rounded edge on your part and you don't see the cut edge. It's extremely difficult to do if your upholstery leather is more than about 1.5 or 2 ounces thick. This machine helps with that, and it's a very, very useful machine. It's not a beginner machine. It is a little bit more complicated. You do have to be mechanically inclined to understand this machine, but nothing else does the job that this machine does. It's a very unique machine, and it is an important tool in the bag maker's or the wallet maker's arsenal. So let's zoom in here and go over the features of the machine. So what you basically have here is you have a knife. It looks like a cup that is spinning inside there, and it's being driven by a right here, it's a stone. And what that stone does is it doesn't touch the blade. It actually grabs the leather and pushes it into the cup blade. They call that a bell knife, right? And the bell knife is consumable. After a few years' time, you may want to consider replacing that blade. But it is something that you can use for a very long time. We haven't had to replace one of those blades yet for a long while. The machine is self-sharpening, so when your blade gets a little bit dull, you can adjust some of the measurements over here, and you can resharpen it for a little bit, and it's super sharp. And that is one thing I want to make perfectly clear about these machines, is that they are very, very sharp. Like most leather pieces, most leather working tools, they need to be sharp, but these skivers are specifically designed to be razor blade sharp and better, and they have to be to do the work that they're going to do. So what we've got here is this is our depth adjustment. We've got a high and low, basically to apply it to the leather. We've got an adjustment here to adjust how much the stone raises or lowers, helps take off the lower portion, the split portion of the leather. And what it is, you actually have a balance between this upper adjustment and this lower adjustment, how much you want to split through the leather. Okay, so it's important to understand that it is a balance, and if you start to squeeze those in tighter and tighter, you're really not going to go anywhere, right? So again, this is where you have to have an understanding of the machine. This really isn't a beginner machine. I want to say this again, but if you're patient and you learn the machine, it does things that no other machine will do. So let's show you what those are like. Now, this machine comes on a standard industrial work table. It's about 4 foot long, it's about 2 foot wide, and it stands at the top of this machine. You're probably looking about, I would say, 48 inches tall. Okay, that's not counting this adjustable lamp that comes with it. This is an 80-watt high-intensity lamp. It's very bright. It runs very cool. So you're not going to tattoo your forehead if you ever bump into it. But let me turn it on and you see how bright it is. All right, you see how that is? Now the rest of my shop looks like I'm in the dark, and it's actually well lit back here. This is a very bright light, and it really helps with making your leather work. So what we're going to do here now is we're going to turn the machine on the switch, and then we're going to come over here, we're going to grab some leather. Now this is a very standard upholstery leather, highly colored, corrected grain, a little stiffness to it. Let's measure how thick this is. Our handy dandy gauge is looks like, yeah, 4.25 ounces. That's probably going to drift a little bit as you go around the bit of leather. Yeah, it's roughly 4.5 ounces. Okay, but that's too much to really bend. I mean, when you try to bend it, you get a nice loop in there, and then that's really not going to look good. Not really if you're trying to make a pocket or something, or a zipper, or turn something inside out. It's very difficult to sew something and turn it inside out when it's that stiff. Your hands get really tired very quickly. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take this piece of leather and we're going to stick it in here to start, just like this. We're going to drop this handle down, just like that, to put it into the working position. And then we're slowly going to apply the pedal. And then it's a balance. This machine will self-feed, but let's be honest here, there's a little bit of tug and pull involved in keeping things balanced. We're just going to feed it in carefully. 1, 2, 3. Hopefully you can see this working. I'm really not pulling that hard. The machine is doing most of the work. All right, now let's have a look at this. Very flexible now. You see that? Very, very flexible. But let's look at the what's really happening here. Look at that. You see how it's shaved that down? Now you can do that really tight folding and gluing that you see in a lot of the wallets, the nice wallets here. All right. Now there's some skill involved with this. Don't let me kid you. All right. Just like anything in leather, you're going to spend some time learning the machine. Okay. But this is actually not that difficult to understand as long as you know that it's a balance between the upper limit and the lower limit. Okay. So that's going to work really well. But what did that split it down to? That split that down to just a hair. Yeah, it's right at 1 ounce now. So it went from about 4.5 ounces down to 1 ounce. And that's about all you can reasonably do. You can actually see that the machine was starting to get into the grain here on the leather. If you zoom in really quick, I don't know if you can see it very well. But yeah, you're actually starting to see some of the grain, and that's about as thin as you could possibly skive this leather and have it actually be useful. Okay, so this is a red upholstery leather, and it is, oh man, it is the hardest leather I've ever had to work. It's got a mind of its own. It doesn't want to listen to you. It's super soft. It's super grained. It's got a beautiful color though, and people love this red. So we end up doing a lot of work with that from time to time, and it's a good test for this machine. So let's give it a shot. I do know for a fact, by the way, this grain is deeper than it was on the purple piece, so we're going to actually raise our foot just a tad before we do this. Okay, we're going to stick our leather in there. Now we've got the 50mm foot on here, but as with anything, a little does a little good. Okay, a lot probably won't do a lot of good, so you want to ease into it. Moderation. All right, so we took a little bit off there, just a little bit, and we went from right at 4 ounces down to 2 3/4 to 3 ounces. Probably not what I want though. Probably want a little bit more than that. So I'm going to dial it down just a little bit more. Let's do this again. All right, much better. You can see the dramatic change now in the shape of the leather. Okay, and that is now 2 ounces. Okay, let's try just a little bit more. I don't know if I can get to 1 ounce, but certainly would not hurt trying it. So put it down. Oh, too much there, too much there. But that was well down towards, yeah, it's 1/2 ounce. So that's maybe too much. Let's back it off a little bit, just a tad. And like anything else, you got to dial it in, right? Still maybe a little too much, a little bit more. And you see I'm working around the edges of the piece, you know, so now all these edges are going to be skived. Certainly some better than others, but if you want a real world evaluation, you got to see those mistakes, right? All right, there we go. There we go. What is that? It's probably about 1.5 ounces. Yeah, close to 2 ounces. So I think what we're seeing is on this red, that ounce and a half, 2 ounces is probably about as low as you can go before you start getting into that grain there. So that's a very normal thing that you have with some of your leather here. So with each piece of leather, you're going to dial it in. All right, let's go back to a piece of purple now. Okay, so this one skives pretty well. Let's try that again. So we adjusted it up, and we haven't taken nearly as much off that one. That is now just under 3 ounces from 4.5. So again, you can adjust it as you like, top and bottom. I tend to keep my upholstery leather somewhere around 1.5 or 2 ounces when I'm doing fine leather work. Below that, you need specialty splitters to really do it well. Something like a band knife splitter, but even used, those run around $20,000, at least in today's current market. But yeah, this is a great machine for somebody who's looking to get into handbags, do alternative leathers, who needs to be able to work with upholstery leathers, but still needs to be able to thin them down. All right? There we go. Look at that. And nothing else really does this type of job. I mean, you can go get a band knife splitter, and it'll certainly do your job. Let me take this guide out. It's in the way here. There we go. We're going to move that guide out of the way. Nothing really does this job. You know, it's a nice machine. And a long time ago, when I got my first one of these, I was a little dubious, but I can honestly tell you that once I figured it out, it was a game changer. And it is probably one of those secrets you don't want to tell other people, because this is where the money's made. So that's pretty much that whole piece skived right in this area, and that's kind of how you do it. All right? All right, so that's it. This is the Cowboy CB-801 bell knife skiver. Well, before we go, one last thing. In case you've been working it for a while and your blade starts to get a little dull, you can actually self-sharpen this. And what you're going to do is actually you're going to operate the machine. You're going to reach over here with this lever. You're going to pull it out of the guard and you're going to push it down. Okay? Now that's activating the sharpening mechanism, and now you're going to pull that sharpening mechanism into the blade, and you'll hear it. And you might even see a few sparks down here. Look down here. That's self-sharpening. You don't have to send that blade out. And back off of that. All right, put it back into position.